Hi everyone. The Kolkata Oxford Debating Circuit welcomes you to today's workshop on British parliamentary debating, basics of BP debate, speaking and judging, conducted by one of the most prominent debaters of the East Circuit, Aditya Mundhra. Aditya Mundra's credits include two times winner and fourth best speaker of Pratija 25 and 26, best judge and open grand finals panel at Ithaca 2.0 26, and six times invited adjudicator at many reputed tournaments, including Vakrota, Vistar, Mukhtalif, IIT, KGP, etc. etc. For Oxford debate needs, the KODC already has you covered, but we are expanding into other formats of debating: parliamentary debate, Asian parliamentary debate, British parliamentary debate, and we are hoping, and in the essence of the same, we are collaborating with East India Pre-ABP, a premier British parliamentary debate tournament of the East Circuit. East India Pre-ABP is happening this weekend on the 11th July and 12th July, right? The KODC expects everyone to also start participating and know about British Parliament, Asian Parliament, and other formats of debate. And in the essence of that, we have organized a workshop today, taken by one of the most competent people to do the same. So, Mundra, over to you.
Right, Krishan, am I audible and visible?
Both clearly.
Right. So, hi everyone, my name is Aditya Mundhra and thank you, Krishan, for that amazing introduction. Right, so today we'll be covering the basics of British parliamentary style of debating. But before I move on ahead, I just want to get a rough idea how many of you have been exposed to Asian parliamentary style? How many of you, like, with the raise of hands, if any one of you can confirm, if you have been exposed to Asian parliamentary style of debating? Uh, right, a couple. Fair. So, with this, okay, it's understandable. uh, it's good actually because we want to start like BP debating afresh, because if you see in like a lot of like non-Asian countries like European and North American especially, they start off with British parliamentary as like a basic format of debating, right? So they are not exposed to Asian parliamentary style, so I think a fresh start is good for us. I'll present the briefings. It was made by one of my very good friends, Shubhjyoti, for one of his earlier comps, Ammonia. But yeah, so first we start with the speaker briefings and then we'll move on to the judge briefings on the later half. Right, moving on then. Just a second. Right. So in speaker briefings, we'll cover four things particularly. First are the basics of debating. Then we'll go on to speaker rules. Then how to debate in terms of what a BP debate particularly requires you to do for you to go ahead and win that particular round. And then the types of motions that can go ahead and then come with this debate. I'll take eventual breaks in about 10 to 15 minutes to like clarify any doubts that exist in segments that we'll go ahead and do. Moving on then. Firstly, how does a debate run? Considering this is online comp, I'll give you a breakdown of that as well. So when you go ahead and register for the comp and after you have like done the payment and everything, you will go ahead and receive a private URL link. That link is like particular to you and your participation code and name. That will be used for a few things. Firstly, that will be used for your check-ins, which means that you will mark your availability on that before the round begins. Then on that particular link you will see the draws release. The draws release would be the teams that you go ahead and then face. That would be available on the link once you refresh them, and then accordingly most of these online debates are held in WhatsApp and Discord communities. So like in Discord community and WhatsApp community you will be notified that the draws have been released, and then you can go ahead and refresh your link and check that. Accordingly, in these Discord and WhatsApp communities, motions are also released with given the given time frame, and you will be given a particular amount, like a head start, that at let's say 8:30 the motion is going to release. Eventually, with the motion release on that on tabs as well, which is your private URL link, you can see the motion as well. With that, you will get 15 minutes of preparation. Now, in the 15 minutes of preparation, you have to come up with arguments to be the most relevant team in the room, I would say, and I would be using this word quite a few times because this is what BP debating is inherently about. For that, we'll go ahead with and understand the speaker orders as to how a BP debate runs. So, the BP debate has four sets of teams: two teams on the government side and two teams on the opposition sides. They're namely as the speaker order goes. Firstly, opening government. Secondly, opening opposition. Thirdly, closing government. Fourthly, closing opposition. So the speaker order goes such as, so each team has two speakers particularly, and they are listed as below. So OG particularly has Prime Minister and Deputy Prime Minister, which is this is the first speaker and this is the third speaker. The second speaker is from opening opposition side, leader of opposition. After that, the third speaker, Deputy Prime Minister, is done. The fourth speaker from opening opposition comes Deputy Leader of Opposition. That is then where the opening halves of the BP debate has ended. That is the colloquial term used. Then the closing half begins, where it starts with closing government's member of government. Then it changes to closing opposition's member of opposition, and then government whip and opposition whip. So what these roles do, I'll cover in like a detail in a bit. But the primary understanding is that there are there are four teams in one particular room in one particular round. One particular round will have multiple such rooms, such as 10 or 20 particularly. So there are like 80 teams competing together. So when the motion is released and you will get only one motion, you go ahead and deliberate with your teammate for 15 minutes. Then after that is done, you go ahead and then give your arguments in that particular order, starting with opening government and ending with closing opposition. Covering what the rules do then. Firstly, onto Prime Minister. Right. So here, your main idea is to set up the debate. The idea here is that you go ahead and then you define that what the particular debate looks like. It inherently means that, oh, you must have heard that you need to go ahead and define the terms in the motion and things like that. Here, particularly, it would go ahead and mean a lot of context setting, which means that feminism, let's say, is a word given in the motion that you need to define. Feminism has a general idea as to how feminist movements, let's say, look like. That is correct. But then, how a feminist movement would look like in a third world country compared to how a feminist movement would look like in a first world country, like let's say comparison of USA and Morocco, right? So there, how feminist movement operates and how feminist movement looks like are different inherently. In motions, you will get like these particular ideas that let's say the feminist movement should put this X idea forward in third world countries. There you cannot go ahead and then portray feminist movements and like define feminist movement as let's say all powerful, because then at your opposition it can easily come up and then they say that, oh, it's not the case in third world countries, and that is where we are having the debate. So by defining here you mean particularly context setting, and that is where you need to be very precise, that even if you're defining as simple terms as let's say feminist movement or let's say any social justice movement that is happening, or something as simple as scientist maybe, right? Scientist in a first world country, scientist in a third world country, a rich scientist, a poor scientist, depends on a lot of things, right? A student. So that is how you should be like smart about how you set up the model, because then that is how it would benefit you. But then there is also like a necessity for you to leave enough room for argument, because British parliamentary debate primarily happens on comparatives. And for comparatives to happen, it is necessary that the opposition side also comes with arguments. And then by comparing your arguments with the other side, you go ahead and then tell why your arguments are better. You can obviously go ahead and rebut them, but then it is necessary for you to go ahead and compare to necessarily go and win the debate. The second speaker, which is leader of opposition, is like you should rebut the main ideas coming from the PM because you're on the opposite side, but also you should present the most important parts of your argument. Similarly, you would do a lot of context setting which is required for your side of the debate, which means a motion may be looked at two types. If you want to go ahead and talk about a religion motion, religion might have a good side and a bad side to look at it, positive and negative aspects. So if PM goes ahead and then sets up the positive aspect, the LO then comes ahead and then sets up the negative aspect according to the motion that is given. So there you can go ahead and then set up on your own premise at LO, and there you should contextualize why this debate should be looked by your angle as well, and why is that angle most important. And then moving on, you can go ahead and rebut that why government's angle, which is opening government's angle particularly, not that charitable, or let's say not that real, or let's say not that impactful to look at from. We'll get into what these words mean in a bit. Third comes the deputy prime minister, the last member from opening government. Here, you go ahead and then you will rebut whatever material you go ahead and then get from opening opposition, which is to say that why their part of context necessarily is not like correct, or why your part context makes more sense than their part context. and then you'll go ahead and then advance more argument, right? When you go ahead and then advance your argument, it is important to note that because you're the last speaker of your team, at the end minutes you should also go ahead and emphasize on advancing the idea that why your team wins, which means to say that you go ahead and tell in terms of burden analysis. We'll get into what burden analysis is when we do motion types, but like you relate your arguments and your context settings and your, let's say, constructives, as we call it in debating term. You go ahead and relate it that why are they the most important thing in the debate and why they should be credited the highest. That can be done in terms of how many people you are impacting. That can be done in terms of, let's say, what kind of principle you are upholding. It can be done in terms of, let's say, what kind of specific stakeholder, which means vulnerable communities, or let's say only women, or let's say only third world country citizens. What kind of people you are impacting and why are they important to the debate. These are certain things that you should go ahead and necessarily do because you're the last speaker of your team. Similarly, in deputy leader of opposition, you will go ahead and try to push out opening government as much as possible out of the debate and establish that why your team particularly stands over opening government. And then similarly, you would also compare and then weigh out weigh out whatever case has come and then tell that why your case is most important according to how the motion should be defined and why your team wins over opening government. The interesting part here comes in member of government, the fifth speaker of the debate. Here, they are a part of the government, but they are a separate team. Now, in BP debating, it is very important to note that you don't win as government or opposition. You take a first, a second, a third, and a fourth. And there are a point system added to it. So the first team takes 3 points, the second team takes 2 points, the third team takes 1 point, and the fourth team takes 0 point. So, if you need to go ahead and then qualify for quarterfinals or semifinals of the tournament, you need to accumulate your points at the highest number to go ahead and then qualify. And it will not be dependent on your individual speaker scores, but in case there is a tie, your speaker scores then will matter. We'll get on to speaker scores part also in a little later. So it is very important to note that if you're a closing half, particularly, which is a closing government or a closing opposition team, your aim is to take a first, not only defeat opening opposition and closing opposition, but also to take over your opening government. How do we do so? We'll get into that. So as a member of government, your work is to mainly go ahead and then present an extension which is valuable to the debate. What are extensions? I'll get into that a bit into a bit later. But like the basic idea is that you have to provide something very different to the debate. Those are two types basically. You can go ahead and provide something to the debate that the opening government missed, which could be more important to the debate. Like they did not at all talk about it. So like you introduce a completely fresh idea, but then there are certain rules to it. How do you do that? I'll get into that also. But then that is how you can introduce a fresh idea, which is like without like saying that your opening half is bad, because that is something that is strictly prohibited. You cannot say that your opening half is bad and rebut them. You have to be somewhat consistent with your opening half. So you can bring in a completely fresh idea which, let's say, your opening half missed, and say that, oh, why that idea is more important, without saying that, oh, opening's idea is bad. But also you can go ahead and then say that, oh, opening gave this argument, but then it is not proved because it lacked this logic or this analysis. What we do and this impact cannot be fulfilled without this analysis. So like we'll get into that when we talk about argumentation a bit. But then if for any argument to go ahead and matter in BP debating, it's all about analysis and logic at the end of the day. So the more logic you have in your arguments, and how simplified your arguments are in terms of how what a judge can buy, what a judge looks like, we'll also get into that. That is how you go ahead and then become more relevant in the room particularly. So it's very important to note that you are at all points of time fighting all three teams. So at member of government, you go ahead and you directly rebut opening opposition because they're an opposite bench. You go ahead and then tell that whatever you are saying new in the debate, because you have to say certain new things for you to go ahead. You cannot like repeat what your opening said. And then why are they more valuable than whatever has been said in the debate overall. Next is the member of opposition, a pretty similar role to member of government. Here you also go ahead and like give new arguments or new framings, particularly that new additions to the debate which like should win you the debate, which are unique enough, which like fulfill your burden the best. Then you go ahead and then take out the entire opening bench also. If time permits, you can also like weigh out your opening halves, but that is a more of a job of a whip, and we'll get to that now. So major idea is that you push majority of your arguments because none of the whips on either teams are allowed to give any new arguments in their speeches. So that's a restriction there. So this is why it's important for member of government and member of opposition to push out as many arguments as possible. In terms of like, it's not about quantity of arguments. Obviously, it's about quality as well. But in terms of, let's say you have one argument that is very important, you should not leave for your whip to cover it. You should cover the entirety of it and let your whip weigh it out. What is weighing, we'll get into that. But then let's say you have three arguments in another scenario. You should not leave one argument to your whip and do two arguments. You should introduce all three, cover as much as possible of all three, and what parts whip is allowed to do, we'll get into that right away. First comes the government whip to close from the closing government, the second and the last speaker of the third team. Their main idea is to go ahead and then firstly rebut closing opposition, because they're the last speaker of the government and the last speaker of the opposition hasn't been rebutted yet. So their first idea is they should go ahead and then generally rebut closing opposition, but then there are different formats to go ahead and do whipping, so like it depends. Moving on from there, you go ahead and then establish that why whatever your member has said in their one speech is very important. In terms of number one, they beat your both opposition benches, which is opening opposition and closing opposition. Here you can add more rebuttals, particularly to like strengthen your member's case, and then they go ahead and then you go ahead and then basically weigh it out that, oh, even if their arguments, let's say, stand, we win because of XYZ things. That XYZ can be, let's say, things on, let's say, your impacts are better on scale, you have a like higher principle, you go ahead and then explain why that principle is so important in the debate, or why that principle is, let's say, the highest burden that you need to fulfill because of that motion. Motion burdens, we'll get into that. Similarly, moving to opposition whip, you are the last speaker of the debate. So you hold a certain amount of power because there is no one to rebut after you. It does not mean that you introduce new things, because that means that you're also restricted in terms of you cannot add but literally anything new as equal to as gov whip obviously. But then what both whips are allowed to do still is impacting, which means the basic frame and the basic analysis of the argument has been already provided at the member. You just go ahead and tell that, oh, this analysis has been said by my previous speaker, this is what the impact will look like. That is one thing that is allowed at whip. Both gov whip and opposition whip can go ahead and then do that. Then moving on from that, you go ahead and then, as similar to GovWhip, you go ahead and then compare basically that why whatever your member said and why your rebuttals are the most important things in the debate and why you should take a first. Here I'll talk about like bench comparisons. You go ahead and then have the ability to rebut the entire other side. Like as closing opposition, you take out both opening and closing government. Similarly, for closing government, you can rebut both opening and closing opposition. How do you weigh over your own bench without rebutting them? Because it's a strict rule, you're not allowed to knife them. Knifing is particularly saying that, oh, my previous opening said this and they are bad or they are like wrong, particularly. You cannot go ahead and say that. But also say that, oh, that their frame is, let's say, like self-defeating, or like they, like, you cannot point out harms in that case particularly. How do you then win? The idea then is to go ahead and then prove that why you are better inherently. So inherently a positive side of it to look at from. So like instead of saying that, oh, my opening takes a second below me because they are bad on this measures, you go ahead and say, I take a first over my opening because I am better on these grounds. So that is the idea as you go ahead and then compare, because then you go ahead and are able to link that why are those things more important to the debate. I think all teams are supposed to do that, but then as closing halves, you inherently have the advantage to go ahead and then tell that how the debate has went. And then after hearing a lot of debate, you get a lot of fresh ideas, you understand a lot of depth in arguments, and then you're also able to explore the debate more. And BP motions are set in a way that four teams can debate, and there is that sort of argument depth that is there. And that is the main job that CAPs and motion committees are going to do, especially at EIP as well. So, right. With that, before moving on to extensions, do we have any questions?
I have one question.
Yes, no.
Yeah, so in whips, the moment you're talking about like, okay, you need to waiver your opening and stuff, what should be the ideal strategy that you go ahead and partake in when you want to go ahead and waiver your opening without structurally rebutting them, but also trying to prove why your stuff is more important than theirs?
Right. So I think there are like a few ways to go ahead and then do this particularly. But then the idea to go ahead and then weigh over your openings uh, is primarily the fact that okay, we'll get into extensions as to how do you do extensions. In terms of the fact, at certain points, your opening is most likely to number one, either miss certain analysis of an argument, number two, miss certain impact of the argument, or number three, miss certain important points of the debate as well, or important arguments of the debate as well. But fourthly and lastly, this a lot of times miss that how do you go ahead and then say or like solidify the fact that why is their case the most important, because as I've said before, it is only 15 minutes of prep time you inherently get. So 15 minutes of prep time is less, and that is how the debate becomes a bit more balanced in DP. Because openings a lot of times tend to go ahead and then miss out on, let's say, a lot of micro important stuff in the debate, or while they're focusing on the micro stuff, the important macro important stuff in the debate. And I think this is where closing comes in, right? And these are the things that you take into consideration when you want to weigh over your opening. Is that number one, what sort of analysis do you prove that makes their case not only better, but that it should be credited to you in terms that without your analysis their case was not making sense or was not getting fulfilled in terms. But also secondly, what is like a certain important aspect of the debate that while staying within the larger frame of the government's debate, you can still go ahead and prove that is exclusively yours in terms of why is that the most important thing in the debate. So, for example, if you want to go ahead and then weigh it out in, let's say, feminist movement motion again, for example, you can go ahead and then tell that, oh, for in third world countries, for the feminist movement, the most important thing becomes not to change, let's say, large scale narratives because there is a lot of backlash, but to go ahead and then reach as many on ground women as possible, so that you can go ahead and then actually start by helping them and then empower them to go ahead and then change the narrative further in the future. If you go ahead and then prove to me that this debate particularly exists in the feminist movement's capacity in the third world country from closing exclusively, which let's say the opening misses because they go ahead and say that feminist movement will have similar capacities as first world countries as they similar capacities in third world countries as they do in first world countries. I think that is something that then the closing can use to go ahead and then take over the opening house. But then there are multiple ways to go ahead and do that. I think the next workshop is going to cover that in terms of argumentation and extensions. Does that answer your question now?
Yes, yes, it does. Thank you so much.
Right. Moving on with extensions then. I think this is largely the next workshop's idea, but then little bit of basic idea on like how to go about it. You, right, sure, I'll take that.
Thank you for the honor. I would like to ask you to please pardon the um the role of the Prime Minister, please, because I felt like I missed part of it because of my network.
Right. If that's all right, it's being recorded. I believe Prashant is recording it, and I think the recording will be shared with all of you. So, is it cool if you like have a look back at that, and then we can move on with the session?
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. Moving to the extensions then. There are three types of extensions that you can go ahead and do. The first that I talk about is adding a new thing, which is adding breadth to the debate. Is that you go ahead and contribute an entirely new point, which is that argument is not has not been said by opening government at all. The thing is that you need to also go ahead and then all points of time clarify that why that argument is the most important argument in the debate. I think you go ahead and do that by doing mostly how your argument is most connected to the motion, or how your argument is satisfying the actor of the motion and things like that. But then secondly, you can go ahead and add more depth into the argument. I think this is a thing that a lot of teams struggle with at the beginning. But this is something that you can also do with like very careful listening and note taking, I believe. It's like about your ability to hear and take notes. Because then the idea here becomes that you go ahead and then take opening government's arguments which are incomplete. Because a lot of times happen you will happen to get those in debates. So in those premises particularly, you go ahead and then fulfill those arguments in a certain way that not only beat out the opposition side, but also in a way that you are being able to be credited for those arguments. How do you go ahead and do so? Your main idea is to, number one, add a certain analysis. Let's say OG has given a certain idea which O has taken down completely. By the deputy prime minister, the idea was not being able, like the idea was not saved. If you at CG come ahead and then tell that why and give an analysis as to how your idea about that particular thing that OG was talking about is something that takes down O's rebuttals, or like O's rebuttals do not work against what you are giving on that same idea, then I think that idea is still credited to you. Because if O's rebuttals have successfully taken down OG's arguments, then you are providing a new analysis within that argument, or let's say a better analysis within that argument at closing. I think that is then contributed to you within a debate. But then other than that, you set up need of like certain premises within the debate. I think context is very important. You need to always go ahead and then contextualize debates in the certain way that, and it is like also about grounding them in the real world, in the sense that okay, you can go ahead and then look at the real world how it works, and then you can take context from it. I think that number one goes ahead and then helps you in terms of impacting a lot, because then you're able to identify what can happen on ground in the according to things like you've probably seen in life or probably you have read about. But then other than that, you get like, let's say, a better idea as to how these things work in a mechanistical way in the actual world, and those are the basic links that you go ahead and then use in this debate. And then OG tends to miss, or O tends to a lot of times miss a lot on that, and that is where I think both the closing house come in terms of adding this particular context that oh, the real world works like this, and that is why this context is important to this debate, and that is why whatever they are saying, why we can say it like, let's say, better in terms of we are providing this very important context, and with this very important context should win us the debate, because we are creating a very large impact or upholding a very important principle, or like or like, let's say, addressing the most vulnerable actor, things like that. The third thing that you can do is rebuttal extensions. I think here is the idea that oh, your opening has said a lot of things already. At whips, your closings would have already given out their cases. At that time, you go ahead and then rebut. You give new responses in closings, right? I think there are a lot of ways to give response to an argument. I think because if you go ahead and think logically, if let's say it's a debate about politics, if opening opposition has given an argument, let's say, which is, let's say, anti-minority, I think uh, from OG you can go ahead and then take it down in, like, let's say, a pro-minority way as well. But then from CG you can go ahead and then take down that argument in, let's say, in terms of how the larger election looks like, or how the larger politicians would look like in terms of, let's say, the stance on pro-minority and anti-minority, right? And that is, I think, something that you can go ahead and say that oh, this is a new idea in terms of, let's say, that OG talks about that oh, you can be pro minority instead of this anti minority. We tell you that oh, you go ahead and then take a look at you go ahead and take a look at the precedent in terms of what has happened when the people have taken an anti minority stance, and then as a politician you go ahead and then choose your path, something along those lines, right? So that is, I think, a new response which go ahead and works. You will have avenues of response. You need to just go ahead and think about the debate from a different angle. Also, a very important note, having an extension does not win you the debate. You also need to go ahead and then tell why that extension is important. I think a large part of it falls on the whips, but then members can also go ahead and then do so. Moving on. POIs. I think this is a very important ability in BPD debating, that is about questioning. And I think this is what makes BPD debating interesting. because you go ahead and then get to engage with your other halves. Because primarily, I think one question you people might have by now is that if the first half speakers do not get a chance to like opening government is the third speech, and then member of opposition is the sixth speech. So like, how will they rebut each other? Or like, let's say DLO is the fourth speech and member of government is the fifth speech. How will they rebut each other? Like, POIs are the way you go ahead and then do it. POIs are largely preferred from your diagonally opposite benches, which means if you're opening opposition, you will take it from closing government, and if you're opening government, you can take it from closing opposition. I think, and then you can also take it from your like subsequent opening or closing house. So like any government team can take a POI from any opening team. But then you go ahead and then prefer your diagonals to go ahead and then understand number one maybe what their case is, or number two you can go ahead and use that to solidify your case. Now POIs are basically 15-second questions. They are you can give a statement as well, but it's preferred if you have it in the way of a question because a lot of speakers prefer it that way. You go ahead and then question on the kind of logic that is being used by the speaker in this speech. And the idea of a PO is to go ahead and ask something logically so strong against the speaker's speech that that is detrimental to whatever they're trying to build up in the debate. So a very simple idea is onto the facts that let's take an education motion right regarding child. I think in an education motion, if like let's say an OG is giving an argument that oh a child should be segregated into particular streams after the age of 10 only because it helps child grow into let's say a better working individual. I think from CU then you can go ahead and then ask this POI that oh, but then you cannot guarantee that the child becomes a better working individual just because they have studied that subject a bit more years, because the child's interest or level of understanding and IQ capacity can lie entirely at something else. You are just creating a more streamlined, depressed IT sector people. Like fair enough POI to us. So that is then you can go ahead and then idea of a POI when you're asking a POI. You do not ask a POI frequently. A POI, the entire question should be 15 seconds long. A speaker has the liberty to cut you before 15 seconds. If they do, please respect that. Do not get into a quarrel. Because it is the speaker's time at the end of the day. Each speaker has like 7 minutes to speak with the 15-second of grace time. You should complete your speeches within 7 minutes. POIs are allowed to be taken only after the first minute and before the start of the sixth minute. So at 1 minute 1 second to 5:59. The new BPT manual, which we will also be following at DIP, I very much believe so, also addresses the fact that you can take a POI. Taking a POI is basically to go ahead and then ask between your speech that if there are any POIs. So let's say if you're at the 5 minute mark of your speech and then you think that you have already given enough content for you to engage with other teams, so you can go ahead and then say, okay, I'll take a POI from closing. Okay, I'll take a POI from opening, things like that. So you prefer which team you want to take a POI from. Generally, teams prefer closing, but then you can prefer your opening as well. No harm in that. As long as you take a POI, right? It's fine. So two is like okay. You might not take two because I believe BP debating has like expanded a lot in terms of the logical analysis that you can get into in terms of depth and breadth. So I think one POI per speaker is also fine. But you should take POIs because that is something that helps in engagement. Because when judges are doing this cross-bench analysis in first to fourth, because you are not directly engaging, your matter, the arguments that you give will engage with each other. If you take POIs, there is a direct connection between the argument that both of you are pushing. I think that goes ahead and then helps judges to clarify that why you clearly take over them and why they clearly take over you. Depends on whether you're asking or taking the POI. For a POI, generally respect POI preferences. I mean, you're not mandated to do so, but then please do. It like makes for a good debate, right? Also, do take POIs for sure. Like it's like I would say, like make it a habit to take a POIs at like 5:30 of your speech or something like that. I mean, generally whenever you prefer, depending on which speaker rule you go, but then 5 is a good time to take a POI generally. So because it will affect your speaker scores according to the new manual. And yes, it will also like flip close calls, because then if you're not directly comparing your material to other benches through the POI, it might become slightly vague for judges, and then you never know where the call is going, right? So that's the thing. The idea of debating is to be then persuasive. After we cover this, I'll take a bit of questions. Four things under this that has been like made by my beautiful friend. First, the depth of argumentation. The depth of argumentation is your, like as is written, your ability to back up your claims about the debate with reasons why your claims are likely. For it to be likely, and I think that is where the second part also comes in, your debate needs to be grounded in reality, which means you will like hear this term a lot when you go ahead and speak in groups that, oh, this the other team is speaking in debate like their impacts don't materialize and stuff like that. You are going to hear that for sure. The idea here is basically saying that whatever debate you're doing, it is going to be completely and entirely based out of logic. Your speaker score is going to be determined entirely based out of logic. Your rank in the particular room is going to be determined entirely based out of the logic. But that logic also needs to be relevant logic in terms of what the motion gives you and what side of the motion you are on. When you go ahead and do that, whatever debate you are doing, you need to identify real world circumstances that are attached to the debate, and then go ahead and then ground your debate on that. And this is where I'll go to back when I go ahead and talk about setup in like the PM, that, oh, when you're talking about that feminist movements in third world countries look different than feminist movements in first world countries. I think this is where you go ahead and then ground the debate in reality, because feminist movement is a movement which like helps women at a larger scale, whether it be rural women or urban women. Fair enough, but that is debate land. Feminist movement helps a lot of women in rural and urban areas to go ahead and then claim their rights and give them like platforms to go ahead and then negotiate with government in first world countries. In third world countries, they're still fighting this very strong narrative that is there against the feminist movement or like women rights inherently. And their main idea is to go ahead and then protect the women there who are not getting their rights at the very first place, and then to go ahead and then fight against the narrative. I think this is where you go ahead and then ground the debate in reality. And this is where then you talk about that why this debate is important in X perspective or Y perspective. And I think that covers the second part as well, because then grounding your argument in reality also requires a lot of characterization. I think PM's main job is to, PM and LO both's main job are to go ahead and characterize, but both the members, since they are the first speaker of their teams, should go ahead and spend certain time characterizing their own arguments as well. That argument can be an analysis to your previous speaker. That argument can be a new argument that your previous team has not thought of. But then the members should go ahead and then spend some time characterizing as to why their part of the argument or why their part of the contributions are more important to the debate. Works both for member of government, member of Congress. But then characterization inherently means that you go ahead and characterize the kind of things that exist within your argumentation. So if in your argumentation, let's say hospital systems lie and governments lie and general public lies and people who are like troubled by the government, bad government hospital system lie, I think it's very important for you to go ahead and then characterize all of them as to how these people inherently look like and how do they impact each other, because I think that will most probably become a certain necessary part of your argument. So if you go ahead and then frame out that, oh, these people inherently look like this is their character basically, that people who are suffering from the bad health system are like in very bad conditions and they're like generally on this poor strata of society, or let's say the economically lower strata of society, because the rich people can afford private hospitals and stuff like that, right? That is, I think, you go ahead and then draw character, and then you go ahead and try to run arguments that, oh, the healthcare system should be changed in this manner so that these people get the most amount of benefit, because this is how bad the situation is. Thirdly, you should always justify the importance of your argument, and I think this becomes very relevant only in VP debating. I've not seen this in other formats of debating a lot. It is that you should go ahead and then always justify that why your argument is the more argument in the debate, right? And why your impacts or your pushes are something that the judges should always care about. I think that one way to do that is always to go ahead and then be comparative with the other side. At least at OG and O, you need to be comparative because closings will anyways be, that is their main idea. But then the idea here is to also like go ahead and specify that why your burden fulfillment or why your impact or why whatever, like what is the exclusive important thing that you're giving to this debate that no other team is giving, and that is why you should win the debate. How is that the most relevant thing in the debate, and how is that the most logical thing in the debate, and how is that the most impactful thing in the debate. I think these are the things that you can consider justifying your claims on. Lastly, the validity of your arguments, as I have already covered, needs to be logically consistent, particularly onto the idea that, oh, that any argument that you make entirely depends on logic. So, like, does not depend on your like speaking style, the vocabulary that you're using, or like how do you frame your arguments inherently. They need to be logically linked. I think the style in VP debating inherently comes out of the fact as to how logically consistent your arguments are. Which means if your argument is like very logically simple to understand, you are more likely to go ahead and then get better speaker scores and also be more persuasive inherently. And if you're more persuasive, you're also more likely to win. So I think that is the idea as to how do you go ahead and then structure your arguments in the larger frame, but then it has to be linked with logic at all points of time, and it should be logically consistent, which means A should come after B, should like A, B, C, D should come in that way. It should not be like A, C, B, D kind of a thing, right? So that's the idea. Moving on. We'll get into motion types. I'll cover this very quickly. Before that, do we have any questions? Right. Yeah. I think a couple of ways to do that is number one, go ahead and then look at the debate from a different angle. I think no debate is unilateral, which means no feminist motion is only impacting women. Like no, like let's say, what to say, a governance motion is only impacting India kind of a thing, right? So like look at different ideas. If there is a policy motion, like if there is a motion about governance, you are most likely to go ahead and then get arguments about the criminal justice system, but you can also run arguments about the police system, about the finance system, things like that. When you go ahead and do that, you need to also go ahead and then push the idea that, oh, if your opening said criminal justice system and you said police systems, why police systems is the more important thing to the debate. I think there are not a lot of things that you will get, so you will go ahead and confuse that, oh, this is important or that is important. There will be a limited range of options, but that limited range of options will be there to go ahead and exist. You need to like think a bit broadly, or you need to go ahead and be very, very like, let's say, scrutinizing of your opening in terms of analyzing which arguments they are logically making and which they are not. Because the arguments they are not logically making, you can still get credited for those. So I think that is the idea to go ahead and answer that. Does that make sense? Right, I think the question in chat. Right, if you want, you can drop your questions in chat as well. If you feel uh, right, I think refusing a POI comes like you cannot accept a POI and then refuse it. So like you first like if you take a POI or you do not take a POI. If you're taking a POI and after you're hearing the question you think that, oh, answering that might like trouble my own case, uh, the worst idea to do is like push it onto your other speaker. But the second idea you can also go ahead and do is like you flip it onto the other team as well. So I think this happened with me very recently in a debate I was doing. I think the POI that was asked to me was that, again feminist debate. Wow. But yeah, the POI thing I think that was asked to me was that these feminist movements, particularly by going ahead and then taking X action, would not make such big of an impact because this X action that is happening, that is a very localized thing. That is something that opening up asked to me as closing government. And I think my response to that as closing government was that, oh, if you want to say that this particular thing that the feminist movement should deny this act, like not deny, sorry, should denounce this X action is not going to create that big of an impact and hence should not denounce them. So they should also like symmetrically not promote it because it is not going to create that much of an impact. And the problem is opposition's case was that the feminist movement should promote it. So I think there are always ideas to go ahead and then flip the entire like argumentation on their head that, oh, if you want to run this is symmetrically bad on your side, or you can go ahead and then always run ideas on symmetricity and asymmetricity. Symmetricity is that things are happening on both sides. Asymmetric things is happening on one side and not on the other. So if they want to push a harm onto you through the POI, you can symmetricize it by saying that, oh, this occurs on your side as well. Or you can go ahead and then asymmetricize or trade it off in the way that, oh, this harm, number one, does not occur in the way you tell. It happens in a very less harmful manner because XYZ. But also, we are giving this benefit because of this in exchange of this small harm. And this benefit is important because of ABC reasons. So that is, I think, how you go ahead and then do that. I think there are ways to, like, there are steps to it. You go ahead and then you first analyze how do you reach the benefit. Then you analyze that what is the world that you are setting up the benefit in. Then you go ahead and analyze how do you reach the benefit. Then you go ahead and tell me how that benefit actually takes place in the real world. Then you tell me why that benefit is important in the context of the debate. And lastly, I think you tell me that why that benefit is on comparison to other teams, uh, the most relevant thing in the room. So like there are like so many steps towards it. So I think it's about taking one at a time. Right. So that's I think about the POI. I hope that answers your question, Arya. Right. If there are no further questions, moving on. Yeah, I'll not drag it too much. Just a second. Right. Is my screen visible though? Right. Thanks. Motion types. We'll just go through quickly about this. Policy debates. I think there are two types of motion that comes within policy. Number one is this house would or THW, or it will come as this house as X should do Y, which looks like that this house as the BJP government should ban the cockroach Janata Party, something like that. Right. In these cases, it is very important that OG provides a particular model. It looks like a policy basically. In a policy motion, you can go ahead and then set up that how this policy will look like. So let's take this motion like hypothetical motion itself. That this house as the BJP government would ban the Cockroach Janata Party. Then you would go ahead and then say that, oh, Cockroach Janata Party's existing user accounts as a collective would be banned from Twitter and other social media platforms. Their individual accounts who are like running the platform will not be harmed, but also if any, let's say, post has been made which can be considered as harmful or insightful, that is something that is also the BJP government is planning to ban. And then after that, the BJP government is also going ahead and then going to ban the existence of the Cockroach Janata Party. You can go ahead and tell that, oh, you can do it in an, they will ban it as an anti-national party, or they will ban it for some other reasons. But like there are multiple ways to go ahead and do it. I think this is how you go ahead and then set up policy. You figure it out that, oh, this needs to be done for this policy to be implemented. Because what is a policy about? A policy is about bringing a sort of a change, or resisting a sort of a change. So you go ahead and then think it out that how will you resist it, or how will you bring the change. I think O on the other side like is either resisting the change if OG is bringing it, and if OG is resisting it, O is bringing it, kind of a thing, right? So then O is particularly there to go ahead and tell you that why the resistance to this change is something that is, let's say, very necessary, right? And that is where they go ahead and then give a counter policy. I think a lot of time in policy debates you'll also figure out that you're kind of siding for the same thing, which means to say that this house would mandate segregation of students of years 11 and above into streams of science, commerce, and arts. Right. So from opposition, you go ahead and then run a case of something like, no, we do not segregation. We do not segregate them that young. We segregate when they go into their higher secondary or their like college years education, basically. Right, which is the system in most countries. I think 11, 12, and that is the main time of segregation. I think then opposition runs that as a debate, and then you go ahead and talk about that why that development between the age of 11 and 16, between the ages of choosing, is so important, right? I think though that is how policy motions on counters work. CG and CO must defend their models in the sense that whatever model CG and CO like opening government and opening opposition has given, I think they should be sticking with it. But also in that regard, it does not mean that if OG and O are saying something which does not make sense, or they are saying something which is like harmful for their own case, closing has to still stick with it. Does not mean that. Which means if, let's say, again in this motion, OG comes and says that, oh, after the age of 11, we will directly segregate them at the age of 16. That is being uncharitable to the debate. So CG does not have a burden to stick to that model. CG can then come and give a new model. Similarly, from CO, they cannot go ahead and then run that. Oh, we will not segregate them at the age of 11. Segregate them at the age of 13. That is again skewing the debate. So CO does not. If O does that, CO does not have, let's say, a mandate to go ahead and stick with that policy. So these are exceptions as to when you do not stick with the policy. But then largely from CG and CO in policy debates, you also need to go ahead and expand on policy, which means also it happened very recently with me. It was a housing motion debate, and I think that the opening of talked about that, oh, this housing will be decentralized and planning and zoning charge would be given to local authorities, but funding will come from central government, and that's it. In closing, we went ahead and talked about that, not just planning and zoning, but how infrastructural development, how, let's say, planning in terms of what kind of population density and demographics will be used in terms of building those homes. The funding that is there to come would be set in terms of national targets. Things like this were said by us to go ahead and then extend upon the model at CG. Right. So, right, this is also there. Just closings can also give counterfactuals. Counterfactual is a part of analysis debate. We'll get to that. Sure. Moving on. Empirical debates. I think these are mostly a part of analysis debates in terms of value judgment. They want to go ahead and test the value judgment of a statement in terms of, is that statement true or false or more likely or less likely or something like that. I think we look at the motion like example here, that this house believes that only people who freely choose to have children have an obligation to make sacrifices for future generations. I think the binary this motion then goes ahead and gives that number one. If someone is going ahead and then having children out of, let's say, their own willingness, then they have the, let's say, liability to go ahead and then sacrifice the future generation if something of that sort calls for. Which means if, like, let's say, in an extreme situation, if, let's say, an apocalypse comes today, they should be the last ones to go, right? Or they should get the shorter end of the stick in society inherently. But people who do not have kids, or like who do not have, let's say, do not want to like have kids, or like did not have a choice while having kids, which like trigger warning could be like rape victims and things like that. They are not then burdened with this idea. They get like certain benefits within the society, right? So that is the idea that is there on GOV. And then on OP, it would something be like that, why that idea is not correct, and why, and then in multiple like frames from OP. One frame from OP can be there that, oh, nobody should have an obligation to make sacrifices for future generation, later on the parents. And the second counter frame could also be that, oh, everybody should like have an obligation to make sacrifice for future generation, which is people who are not choosing to have children, people who didn't have a choice while having children, and people who are willfully having children. I think OP then has the ability to go ahead and choose which what they want to defend. I think it is better for OP to go ahead and then defend the idea that sacrifice for future generation is like spanned across every kind of people, because that is more likely in the real world, and you can, let's say, cite more mechanistic examples from the real world to go ahead and then make your case stronger. But then you can also obviously go ahead and run that, oh, nobody has an obligation, no sacrifice of future generation, people just want to have kids. A fun thing, but like preferably don't do it, right? So these things in these kind of motions, debates will happen on like judgment or principle. So you can also get a motion like, this house believes that the older jury system in the criminal justice system was better than the system currently without the non-jury in India. Something like that you can get. But it is also very important to note that none of the debate are taking places anywhere particular in the world or at any particular time frame. Which means at all points when you get a generic debate motion, you have to assume that the debate is happening in right now at 2026, but it's not happening at any particular specific place. Which means if the debate does not particularly asks you to talk about first world countries or third world countries or island nations or Russia only or India only kind of things. You do not do that. You assume for it to be general, which means you make your debate wide enough for it to be impactful for a larger group of people. You do not narrow down the debate. I think that is called time setting and place setting, and that is not allowed. I think you do not get an automatic fourth if you do that. But if you do that, there is no persuasiveness in your arguments. So if there is no persuasiveness in your arguments, you're most likely to take a fourth. So that is the entire idea. Be general if the motion does not specify anything. Supports and opposes motion further in the analysis. The idea here is that, and they are contrary to each other. So if you get a motion such as like this house supports hookup culture, very common type of motion that we get in debating like for the past 6 months or something, the opposition side will go ahead and then assume the motion as this house opposes hookup culture, and that's why these motions like these motion types exist in a perfect binary. So when you're supporting or when you're opposing, you cannot go ahead and then say that, oh, we only support hookup culture when it is non-toxic, or you cannot go ahead and then like obviously you will go ahead and say that we do not support like human right violations in name of hookup culture. That's fair, but you cannot go ahead and say then that we only support hookup culture when it is a one night stand. That is like hookup culture is broader than that. So then from that is then going ahead and then like half supporting or opposition say also you cannot go ahead and say that, oh, we only oppose hookup culture which does not lead to marriage. That is also like against the motion type. So when you're supporting and when you're opposing, you have to go ahead and then support the entirety of it and oppose the entirety of it. Which means, and I think these are the most comparative type of motions because you get a direct binary to go ahead and then compare. Because when you're supporting and opposing something, there are certain harms and benefits that will go ahead and then exist on both sides due to presence and absence of certain factors. I think that is the basic thing that you can go ahead and then use to weigh out a lot of things within the debate, which can go ahead and then give you the edge inherently. Right. Moving on. Regrets debate. I think this is a quite interesting type of motion and also a bit of confusing for a lot of people. I know it's all a bit overwhelming though, but like take it with a grain of salt. It's a activity based thing. You do a couple of debates, you learn automatically. What are regret debates? The motion will sound like this house regrets XYZ. So it can sound like this house regrets the boom of uh, generative AI in social media, right? Or generative AI in like news media, let's say. So then you have to go ahead and then talk about then from government side that why are you there are two things you need to do from government necessarily in a regrets motion. And I think this is very important to be clarified right now. Number one, what is the regret metric? Which means that why are you regretting it? So in this case, why are you regretting the boom of generative AI in news media? Number two, if this boom would not have happened, what would have happened? So there you need to go ahead and then think about the most plausible thing that could have happened if the boom would have not happened. I that strictly needs to be based in reality as much as possible. I think you are thinking, and that is I think is inherently what do you call a counterfactual. It is an important necessity for Gov to go ahead and set it, especially opening government. If opening government does not set it, closing can do it. But if opening sets it, closing can expand it maybe a little bit, but then there are also limits to that. So if a counterfactual needs to exist for this debate to happen, in the counterfactual, you go ahead and say that, oh, if the boom of generative AI would not have happened on news media, you go ahead and then say that, oh, either the boom of generative AI would not have happened in the way that it has, or the boom of generative AI would have happened in a different sort of media and it would have been better there. So the idea is that you say that, oh, this thing, and these motions are called retrospective motions. You go ahead and then say, and then these things that have already happened. So, so the boom of generative AI in news media has already occurred in reality. You go ahead and then take a step back from the boom, and then you go ahead and talk about this. Oh, what is happening there? I think it is very important for you to be very careful about words because it will come like this house regrets the rise of XYZ, or this house regrets the decline in XYZ. You are not regretting the entire thing, you're regretting the rise of it, you're not regretting the entire thing, you're regretting the decline of it. So I think be very careful about the words that are there in these regrets motions. You go ahead and then you build this counterfactual from government. From opposition, you go ahead and then you defend status quo mostly. that no, what has happened is okay, it's fine, and what but at least if it, even if it is not very good, whatever government is saying, it is better than that. I think the last option you should not go for. It is a last, like, last life push thing kind of, but then yeah, that's the idea. Moving on from there. Right. Also, going into net negative, I think the idea of net negative here is that number one, Gov only runs a regret metric that oh, it has happened, it is bad, it should not have happened. You also need to tell me that what would have happened otherwise. Because if opposition is able to prove to me that nothing better would have happened otherwise, opposition can win the debate. So that is the problem Gov has in terms of going net negative. But Op also has a problem in terms of net negative, in terms of only giving rebuttal that oh, whatever their world is saying is bad. But you also need to say that not only whatever their world is saying is bad, but that is also, but because that thing does not exist in our world is better or our world is good. I think that is the idea that you go ahead and then push. Actor debates, very important type of debate. I think the actor debates here, I think there has been a very recent huge manual change as well, I'll cover that. But the actor debates are generally termed as this house as, let's say, KODC would take part in EIP. Simple. So here KODC is the actor, which means at all points of time you need to go ahead and then think about things which would appease KODC as an actor. The idea here is that oh, and then okay, we are talking about an organization here, right? So this organization is presumed to have basic intelligence. This organization is presumed to have knowledge about other things. I think that is one of the basic things that you need to go ahead and then consider when you're judging act, like judging or speaking on actor emotions. Like let's say we had a very funny motion, like this house as an impoverished man would choose to become a pirate, and it was set in like 1700s and stuff like that. So then the idea is that you go ahead and talk about that. Oh, what is the perspective of this impoverished man, and why, from this impoverished man's perspective, the man would rather become a pirate from government and would not rather become a pirate from opposition. Right. There is one stoppage here though, and that is the update of the new manual. You cannot deem the actor to be irrational, which means only, let's say, if an actor is poor, that doesn't mean that opposition will come and say, oh, the actor is poor, the actor is down, so the actor will do anything for money. So the amount of money Gov is giving is not relevant because our money is more closer to the bird's actor. The actor will like is more likely to go for that. This is now not anymore allowed. You cannot call the actor to be irrelevant. The actor can be persuaded of certain things, which means to say that oh, this actor needs money more urgently rather than a huge amount of money. If you prove that, then you can probably go ahead and say that oh, because we are giving the money to the actor quicker, that is why the actor is more likely to go ahead and choose the money how he gets it on our end. I think that is still then persuasive to the fact that you go ahead and establish that why is that urgency there for the actor to get the money quicker rather than the actor to have more money, because then you are being comparative with the other side. If you do not do that, I think that the irrationality of the actor cannot be assumed on a single side, and that is the update of the new manual. With that in mind, an actor also can be persuaded by a lot of things. Certain things persuade him more obviously. The actor is not dumb, and also, one more thing that you can think of is that you go ahead and think of yourself as the benefactor of the actor, which means that you are going to suggest the actor certain things which are going to be beneficial for the actor. And you know the actor, which means that, oh, let's say if you have a very short tempered friend, you would not, as a benefactor, go ahead and then tell them to be, bro, like, calm down. That is not what you will do. But if you are like a very good benefactor to them, you will go ahead and then probably tell them, bro, let's like go for a walk, because that is something that is more proximate and more viable, right? So that is where you go ahead and then assume the rationality of the actor, and that is where you go ahead and then be persuasive as to what reasons could be there for an actor to get into something or not get into something. Preface. I think this is also an analysis type of debate. I think preface is also an interesting type of motion. You go ahead and then preface something. I think this is like quite different from what uh, this house supports and this house opposes debates inherently look like. Because when you're preferring something, you need not necessarily go ahead and say that, oh, the other side is ridiculously bad. You just need to go ahead and say that why your side is more preferable. And I think I like prefer these kind of debates for that matter, because it allows you to be a lot more constructive in terms of you need to go ahead and then build good cases on your side to win. You cannot just rebut the other side and then just like maybe hope and win on that basically. Let's say, oh, we are defending status quo and we just rebut the other side. Sometimes you can win on that. In preface debate, it is highly unlikely because you need to say that why you're preferring something over the other. I think there are two types of motion here, which is that you're preferring X, which means against, if you're not preferring X from opposition, you are going ahead and then preferring status quo, which means that this house prefers, uh, let's say, traditional marriages, traditional marriage rituals to court marriage rituals, right? So here you're talking about the real world. In real world, like what is the more preferable system particularly that you would go ahead and then would want to opt into in comparison to the other. But then you will also get motions like that this house prefers a world where there was no religious heterogeneity, there was only religious homogeneity, which basically means like a one world, one religion. Like this house prefers a world where it was one world, one religion, right? There you have to go ahead and then construct a world from ground zero, that how that kind of world would look like, because we do not live in a world where there is one world, one religion. So you would need to explain what that one world, one religion world looks like, and then you need to go ahead and tell me that why that is better. And I think that also gives you a lot of ambit in terms of setting up what kind of world it looks like, and that is how you go ahead and model the debate inherently from government side. From opposition also you can model. Firstly, if you go ahead and then defend status quo, you model out status quo, of course, in preference. But there are also a lot of motion like this house prefers X over Y. So which looks like this house prefers the jury system over the judge system in the Indian judiciary system or the US judicial system, right? So there you go ahead and then are particularly from government defending jury and particularly from opposition defending judge, and both of you are particularly defending it within the US judicial system. So that is what you need to go ahead and do. You need to be lookout for if a preface motion is setting your what you need to defend in opposition, or is it just the status quo. So the motion will be like this house prefers X over Y, opposition defends Y, government defends X. This house prefers X, government defends X, opposition defends status quo, which is the current world. Definitions. I think this is a very important part, but I'll again be a bit more quick about it. PM is to clarify a lot of context within the debate, because I think PM is one of the strongest roles within the debate, right? Because you go ahead and are able to model out debate in a certain way, which number one allows other teams to debate as well, because you're not like squirreling the debate, you're not like being very narrow with the definitions, but also establishing as to how your setup context is something that needs to be debated in, because your setup context is the most relevant context for the debate. And I think that gives you a lot of power to go ahead and do when you're the first speaker or the first team inherently, right? And that is where your main power of definition comes in. I think it also exists a bit in opposition, where you go ahead and able to number one better the definition given by government, or focus on different aspects of the definition which is given by government to go ahead and set up, let's say, a counter or a comparative case. But thirdly, and this is the least used option, please don't use it if you don't feel necessary, give a definitional clash in terms of, let's say, that you do not accept their definition at all. I'll tell you in what circumstances definitional clash exists. Okay, that someone would come ahead and then tell you that, oh, government sets up the debate that the Indian education system is mainly run by ICSE system, and if you do not have, let's say, an ICSE ISC degree, you're not accepted in any university. That time from LO you go ahead and give a definitional clash that no, that is a lie. There are other systems such as NIOS, which is the National India Open School, I believe, and then there is CBSE, state boards and stuff like that. That is the only time you give definition clash. When the other team is lying, outright lying, and you can prove it very easily. That is the only time you use your definition clash. But other than that, you just mostly go ahead and then number one, expand the definition. Number two, if there are any loopholes, point that out and then give counter definitions to that. So like if their definition does not make sense, you can give counter definitions to that. So be on the lookout for that as well. This happens mostly in the opening part, but then as closing it becomes very important in terms of, let's say, what definition is, let's say, uh, opening halves are missing, because certain definitions opening halves will miss, and that will not allow their case to prosper in the way they would want to. I think for closing, you should be attentive to your opening in terms of what are they missing in terms of definition, in terms of setting up, in terms of frame of the debate. Fiat I'll cover very shortly. It's basically the idea that, oh, the other team cannot come and say that the motion or the policy will not be passed in the parliament. That's it. There is nothing other than fiat to that. Yeah. Other than that, if there is a other than that, obviously government cannot. One more thing, right? Government cannot dictate that, oh, this policy will have this impact only. I think no policy guarantees the consequence, and that is what fiat gives you the range of power, that you go ahead and then are not questioning the fact that, oh, it will pass in the parliament or not, because it's completely a political thing. But given that it passes in the parliament, and that is the fiat that you are giving, what consequences will your policy bring at the end of the day? And I think that is what opposition is also allowed to question within the debate, and that is not within the fiat. Right, moving on. Now we get to judge briefings. I think I'll have to be very quick with this. Anything regarding speaker briefings up till now? Any questions at all? Right. Justin later. I'll tell you that. Skewing is not a word we'll talk about today. Skewing is a word that will be taken up in next session in terms of argumentation and extension. Moving on. Judge briefings, we'll go over it quickly. It's a bit long, but yeah, fine. There are agendas to this. Is like how judge decisions basically work. How do you come to a decision? How do you deliberate? And how do you fill ballots? Because the idea here is that number one, judges also compete, which means that what happens after this debate has ended in at opposition debate, there, let's say, are two judges or three judges on the panel. After the debate has ended, there we move on to the fact. Wait, you go ahead and then you get into the deliberation room, which is a separate Google Meet link you will get or a Discord link you will get. You go ahead and enter that. You then tell your calls to the main chair that is there, which is 1, 2, 3, 4. Or if you're the chair, you take your call. We'll get into the roles later. And who is ranking who what, first, second, third, fourth. And then after that, you begin a discussion to come to a consensus. You are allowed about 15 to 20 minutes for discussion. After that, you take a vote, and then how the vote is decided, I'll also get into that. What do you need to do? And I think I want to talk about OIV here a bit, because what is an ordinary intelligent voter? And I think the new manual, which is the Ottawa manual, defines it very beautifully. That you are an average intelligent university student who does not have any idea about any specific domain or field, but reads newspapers, headlines every day, and not knows what's going on around in the world, but does not understand complex or special information or logic. That's the basic idea that exists. For an average university student for to avoid an exist, you also as a judge, then let's say there is a motion in criminal justice system. You are a law student. If you are judging the debate, you are supposed to think yourself as, let's say, a science major, and if the teams are making any argument which, let's say, an average person would buy in terms of how they perceive criminal justice systems to work, but you, because you're a law student, you know the nitty-gritties of law, you are not able to buy that because that is factually, like, let's say, logically incorrect. But then if that logic is true for most people, you as a judge should be able to buy it. I think that does not happen in a lot of cases, but then you should be inherently careful about the biases that you have, because then if you are, let's say, a tech major person who is judging a motion on like scientific invention or something like that, you are not to then bring out your personal ideas as to, let's say, how science works, like, not how science works inherently, sorry, but then how, let's say, a particular composition is more likely to fail than the other, or why, let's say, one algorithm is not likely to work because of these technicalities and stuff like that, right? I think speakers still have a burden. If they want to go ahead and run such complex arguments, speakers are supposed to go ahead and then explain that. A judge is not supposed to know it. So that's the entire idea of being an ordinary intelligent voter. Moving on, you go ahead and then watch the entire debate for an hour. 7 minutes for each speaker, eight speakers, 56 minutes. After you take notes of each speaker. What is your note taking strategy completely depends on you. There is no format to it. But the entire idea of note taking is that you need to have clarity because you need to have a decision at the end, and you need to be able to justify your decision as to why your team takes first and why your team takes fourth. So the calls can also go like closing government, opening government, closing opposition. That how a haywire call can be. How does it happen? You go ahead and then compare each team's contribution as to what they have said in the debate and how they have proven why that is important. Or secondly, if the motion needs to tell that X, the team should prove X is important if they have done that. And thirdly, and the last resort that you go ahead and take as a judge, and please stress on the fact that it's a last resort, you go ahead and use your average intelligence and your average reasonability as a voter to factor in that why this is most important. It is the team's responsibility to tell you that why is X more important or Y more important or why is this more related to the relevant to the motion. If they do not at all, then you go ahead and then think that why is this more important than that. Otherwise, you decide on what the teams are supposed to say. Right? They need to prove to you logically, which means that on a comparative, all the teams can prove that their argument makes the most amount of sense. But the team which is logically the most persuasive one, that is the one who is going to take a first. Then you go ahead and then decide an order, which you decide the ranking, and then you give speaker scores. Speaker scores will get into that later. There is a discussion which I already tell you. It's 15 to 20 minutes. You can have different calls in the beginning and at the end. It is then your let's say capacity to go ahead and then persuade other judges to go ahead and then flip to your call, or you get persuaded by other judges to flip to their call. I think there is no issues with marking because see, the other judge is supposed to mark you as well, depending on this 15-20 minutes of discussion on how your understanding of debate is and how BPD works and everything. In that time, if you give a different call, I don't think the judge will downmark you at any point of time because that is not their job. Their idea is to identify if you've understood and have taken notes of everything correctly. Because if you are not taking notes of everything correctly, or if you're not understanding certain pieces of logic which should be understood, I think that is then when you get low marks. Otherwise, there is no low marking there. It all just depends on a scale as to what mark you get from a judge depending on the 15 minutes. So it's okay for you to flip your call, but then it does not mean that you will flip your call because that does not also guarantee you a high mark. You should be able to justify your rankings particularly, and I think your level and your capacity of justification is something that can guarantee you high marks. How do you assess a debate? Just running through this. Fundamentally, adjudication is about assessing which team is most persuasive. I already tell you that how you should go ahead and then be persuasive. If teams are doing that, they are being persuasive. And like that's about it. But then moving on to what you should also focus on as a judge. Number one, till what extent teams' arguments, as I already tell you, are logically sound and logically proven, which means that how well they have set up the context, how well they have given analysis as to how a certain thing will happen or not happen, and how well they have shown that if this certain things happen in this particular way, which is it is most likely to happen, then this particular impact will come by, and this particular impact is important because of XYZ reason. The second thing then comes is that how important these are in terms of the debate, because you can go ahead and talk like n number of things or from the economic perspective in a feminist motion. And in a feminist motion, economics can be a very important argument to make. But then, if it depends on the motion entirely, it is your job to go ahead and then identify if economic arguments do make sense in this kind of a motion or not. If it does, you go ahead and do it, well and good, and then you prove why they are more important. If it doesn't, drop those arguments. Move on to like the thing that motion requires. Lastly, you will need to go ahead and then have a lot of comparative in BP, and that comparative is entirely about the idea that why is your side more convincing than the other sides. Here you go ahead and then revert, here you go ahead and then compare, here you go ahead and then weigh out a lot of things with the other teams. You do it as closing, you do it as opening as well. But then the entire idea at the end of the day which you want to push out to the judge is you want to go ahead and tell them as to why your side is the most relevant side in the team, in the room particularly. And I think relevance is proved by two things, which I think takes us to the very basics of judging. In terms of what you need to assess is two things. Why whatever is being said by the speakers is number one true, and is number two important. And I think how you judge if something is important or not is decided by what motion and what context it is set in, and how you judge if something is true or not is by simply looking at the real world out there. Moving on. I think I've covered a lot of this holistic judging, so like I'll just go through it overall. Number one, obviously there are no automatic fourths. You do not give an automatic fourth to anyone. You never take an automatic fourth, even if you don't take POIs or anything. But yes, if you engage less, if you're not responsive to the other teams, you're most likely to take a fourth, which means you're just talking about your own arguments. You're not comparing to any other teams. You're not like if other teams have rebutted you, you are not taking that into account. You're just talking about your case. You will probably take a fourth because you are being uncomparative and non-engaging particularly. Right. I think I've already covered ordinary intelligent motor, but yeah, as long as you don't do that, it's fine. But also regarding that, I think within policy motions and regret motions, I think it's very important for you to go ahead and then give a policy and give a counterfactual whenever required. In a preface motion, build a world whenever required. Because other than that, I think it becomes very difficult for judges to buy your case because that becomes one of your main burdens within motion burden type. And like this is a burden that the motion places on you inherently. If you don't do that, you're again most likely to go ahead and lose. So do that, please. Do not miss out on those burdens. Right, you should not enter the debate. I think I've already clarified this in terms of that you should not use in terms of specialized knowledge, especially if that belongs to your side of domain, considering whatever motion is coming or not coming. Additionally, unconscious bias I also talk about. So let's say you are a person who belongs to the eastern side of India. You have seen politics work in a certain way. Someone who has grown up, let's say in West Asia, which is primarily let's say Israel, Palestine kind of areas, Jordan, Syria, right? They have grown up seeing politics in a very different way. So if you are judging and you are judging a debate about how first world country politics look like, you as a person from Eastern India will have a very different perception of how first world country politics look like in comparison to a person from Syria. You are not supposed to take any of that into regard. You are supposed to assume that first world country politics, general things. There are certain parties which are affiliated to the side of political spectrum you belong on, which is right and left, which is Republican and Democrats in America. I think a lot of parties in UK are also divided now. Divided UK, US, and Europe are divided in terms of liberal parties and activist parties. And there is a general right wing, left wing definition that exists within Western countries in terms of government functions. That's it. Nothing else you're supposed to know particularly until and unless teams tell you anything. So, right. And as lastly that is said, there is no correct persuasive speaking style. You focus on the content of the speakers. The speaker's job is to go ahead and give you logic. If the logic is reflective of what they're trying to achieve and that is in line with the context of the motion, you go ahead and then credit them for that. Contradictions, I think the next session can cover this because I don't want to stress this out a lot. But just to basically say that, oh, you're saying something completely opposite, which basically is something, is saying something like that, oh, Western, what, not Western, sorry. What is the word I'm forgetting? Right, let's say Western corporation. Western corporations in third world countries will be very monopolistic. That is something that let's say your OG said. You at CG cannot come and say that, oh, Western corporations will not be monopolistic in third world countries. You cannot do that. If your member has said that, oh, Western corporations are monopolistic in third world countries, you at WEEP cannot come and contradict that. There is still a way to weigh this out. Because you can still come ahead and say that even if we agree to OG's frame that Western corporations are more monopolistic, will have more monopolistic endeavors in third world countries, I think at all points of time they're also looking to go ahead and then incentivize as much growth as is there possible. And I think that goes in line with monopolization. But then, even if you're not, let's say, having other, like, let's say, regulations to go ahead and prevent monopolization, it is still very important to go ahead and understand that these incentives that go ahead and exist are something that are, let's say, detrimental to the country's growth or something like that. So this is an idea I think that you can still push from CG because then you can go ahead and stay within the frame that, oh, these people are monopolistic, but then you can go ahead and then also change the frame slightly to your advantage that, oh, these are monopolistic because they are very growth and product and like profit incentivized companies. So as long as you deal with those sections, I think that some harm can be lessened on other sections, something like that, right? So yeah, that's a major idea in contradictions. Yeah, rule violations. I think these teams, this is not as important. Right. If there's an equity violation, equity is something that will be covered before the comp in briefings. That what is an equity violation? It is generally a protected attribute such as pronouns and your ethnicity and stuff like that. Nobody can attack you personally and stuff like that. No usage of AI and stuff like that. AI or any like internet help in terms of arguments and like in terms of building your keys, stuff like that. You don't like if you as a judge point see an equity violation, you don't hold the room. You know that equity violation. You inform it whoever the equity officer is. You will be given the form for that. There will be an equity complaint for, or you can directly contact equity person whose contact will be mentioned, and then you can go ahead and then give that to them. But you are not supposed to stop the round or do anything as such. I think I already talked to you a bit about bench comparisons, that how bench comparisons happen. Right, so basically, as I tell you, 1v3, right, and I'm talking about it from the very first, that oh, there is, you push out the other two benches and then you wait for your opening and stuff like that. Deliberation, I think this is important. If you are so, like, if you're given the role of a chair, your idea is to run the deliberation, which basically means that if there are any discrepancies in call, suppose you have OG, OO, CG, CO, and the other person has OO, OG, CG, CO, which means you have a difference in OG and OO. So then your idea, and then the third person has maybe CG and OG. So then your idea is to go ahead and then direct that, oh, let's first discuss on CG and OG. Sorry, first discuss on OG and O, then discuss on CG and OG. Things like that. I think how the bench comparison works will also be like covered in like the briefings as well. But like I'm mostly making it elaborative as in terms of, let's say, so you understand what kind of logic goes behind it. Chair is also to go ahead and then give their own call. They have that liberty, and they will also go ahead and give their own reasonings for their own call, even if they are in the, like, let's say, minority or something like that. After the 15 minutes and 20 minutes, you go ahead and then, like, as a chair, you ask everyone to go ahead and justify their calls. You go ahead and justify your calls, and then you ask for a revote, basically, that okay, after this much deliberation, what does everybody feel in terms of this bench comparison? As a panelist, the chair, when they are going ahead and then dictating this entire thing, you just go ahead and then see to the contributions to what to justify your calls. I think your main scoring that comes, because the idea here is that chair will score panelists and trainees. Panelists will score chairs only, and trainees I think also score chairs if I'm not wrong. But I think I have to check the update on the matter. But yeah, moving on. Panelists, you will have to number one score chair on how well they are running the deliberation and how much did they make sense in the deliberation. But you will also be scored in terms of how well you are able to justify your call by the chair inherently. And right, you have to address the questions that chair poses to you in terms of if they want clarity or something like that. You can also ask for clarifications from chair if need be. Trainees are not the ones who go ahead and then cast a vote in decision making, but their judgments or their clarifications can also be like very much important to the debate. So like, let's say first and second is something that the chair has like better idea on, but the trainee gives like a very important comparison which the chair misses on third and fourth. And I think that also gives you 1 point and changes your speaker scores and stuff like that. And chairs are generally that accommodating of trainees as well. So I think that allows for it to happen. Ballots, I think there is this is the speaker scale, so it's between 100 to 50. The general average is seen around, say, somewhere around 75. You go up and low, like you go higher and lower from that. You go ahead and then please read the manual. These are all available in the manual as to what kind of speeches should be given, what kind of marks. Just to like give you a general idea, in like the topmost competitions in the world itself, I think speakers do not have not gone beyond and like 89 or something, right? So 90 is something that is not something that you give out very freely. But then in the worst cases of scenarios, people have not also gone below 65, let's say, because no one is like that bad as well. So that's why 75 is like taken to the average. Be very precise. Use the width that the manual gives you in terms of scoring. You also have a discussion on scoring, but then don't like go absolutely to the extremes of it. Be careful with it. This is the feedback scale for judges. Judges are scored on a basis of 1 to 10. I think all the reasonings are given there accordingly, that when you score a 10. The idea to scoring judges, irrespective of the fact that if you're a chair or a panelist or whatever, whoever you're scoring as a judge, As a team also, you listen to the oral adjudication, which at the end of 15 or 20 minutes you will be given a 10-minute or 7-minute explanation as to which team took what rank. After listening to that, you're supposed to fill the feedback for the person giving the oral adjudication, which is supposedly the chair. Or in cases of rollover, which I think we'll cover later, you will cover in the briefings as well, whoever is giving the OA. For panelists as well, you go ahead and use this like justification scale for the chair as well. Feedback scale for chair and feedback scale for panelists are the same inherently. You just go ahead, and then the only idea is to like you start from a 10 and then you start marking down from there. So you don't start from zero, and then as the ash proceeds, you go up. And also, just to note, four is like if you give any judge below four, it must have like very strong justifications, because below four is like four is also an inaccurate call, but below four is like absolutely the judge could not like make you understand any amount of logic. So I think it's very important for you to go ahead and go through all of these reasonings as well. I think these are available on the manual, and these will be available on the like within the video which will be shared in recording as well. So yeah, that's about it. Thank you everyone. Are there any questions? Right. Seeing none, thank you everyone for being a part of this session, and I hope this helps you for your participation in EIP. Thanks again. Krishanu, are you there? Just Krishanu, are you there? No worries, no worries.